You rely on this podcast to stay informed and connected with your local community, and we rely on you. Without listener support, this show simply wouldn't exist. Be a part of the team that makes this show possible by donating to our home, KUOW. It only takes a minute. Donate at KUOW.org or follow the link in the show notes. And thank you.
You're listening to Soundside on KUOW. I'm Diana Opong. Vice President Kamala Harris is quickly gaining momentum as a potential successor for President Joe Biden in November. But there's still one major event that will define this year's Democratic campaign: the Democratic National Convention. The convention will take place from August 19th to the 22nd in Chicago. President Biden, who clinched his primary victories, would typically seize the opportunity to discuss policy and outline the party's platform for the final stretch of the election. But his departure from the race and the focus of the convention may be different now. Joining us to analyze the implications of Biden's decision to not run for re-election and how the Democratic Party could move forward is James Long. James is a professor of political science at the University of Washington and a co-founder of the Political Economy Forum there. Hey, James, thanks so much for joining Soundside today.
Thanks for having me.
President Biden secured nearly all the delegates in the Democratic primaries. Are those delegates obligated by law to vote for him? And what happens to their votes now that Biden is no longer in the race?
So they're not obligated by the DNC rules to vote for him. So up until Sunday morning, President Biden had 95% of the pledged delegates, so the nomination was essentially his. And had he stayed in the race and had the convention gone on per usual, he would have gotten the nomination. But in saying on Sunday morning that he would not accept the nomination, he in effect released his delegates. And from that point, even though he did go on to endorse Vice President Harris, those delegates were not necessarily required to vote for her. They were able to vote their conscience for any candidate that put forward their name and nomination with the correct petition under the DNC rules. Now, that being said, it does appear that since Biden's nomination and since Harris has announced her candidacy, that enough state delegates have coalesced around her to put her over the winning margin necessary to receive the nomination. And thus far, we don't have any other challenger to her that's running for it.
Let's delve into the protocols. It's unusual for a presidential candidate to withdraw from a race this sort of late in the process. What happens now? Can you walk us through the next steps of selecting a new Democratic presidential candidate?
Yeah, well, what's happening now, what's happened, and it's happened very quickly and perhaps somewhat surprisingly, is that the delegates that were released from Biden then had to think about, okay, are they going to wait to see, who throws their hat in the ring and wait till the convention to sort it out and vote, or whether or not people were going to quickly coalesce behind one candidate. And it does appear now that Vice President Harris is that candidate. Up through last night and into this morning, various state delegates said that they were going to throw their weight behind her, and she currently has more than 50% necessary to win on a first ballot, and that's really key. And so I think the DNC, I know their Rules Committee is meeting tomorrow evening, but I think as long as nobody else puts their name forward to get the nomination, we will actually see Vice President Harris receive the nomination formally through what the DNC is calling this virtual roll call vote, which might begin as early as the first week of August.
Yeah, and Harris has gotten endorsements from multiple candidates, representatives, including prominent party leaders like Nancy Pelosi. Her fundraising efforts are already gaining momentum with reports that she's raised significant funds in just the past few days. How might these endorsements and her early fundraising efforts impact her campaign strategy sort of moving forward?
Well, I think they impacted short-term and long-term. I think short-term, first of all, having the sitting president and, ostensibly her boss endorse her as he announces that he's not going to run, and then quickly having very important high-profile party elites as well as donors endorse her Sunday and throughout Monday, I think really scared off any kind of challenge for the nomination, as well as the fact that the other attractive candidates whose names have been floated, who might be potentially her VP pick, but their names have been floated, like Gretchen Whitmer or Josh Shapiro, they quickly endorsed Vice President Harris as well. And so I think that's important short term, because that, I think, means she's more or less a guarantee, a lock on the nomination. Longer term, I think it's very important important that the Democratic Party does demonstrate unity, both in terms of purpose, with its party leadership coming together and supporting Harris or whoever candidate they wanted to, but also with the donors as well. And I think that's going to help whoever the ticket ends up being be stronger in the long term to run against Trump and Vance.
And as of now, the co-chairs of the DNC Rules Committee have stated that they intend to create a framework for selecting a new nominee that is open, transparent, fair, and orderly. Does this suggest the possibility of considering other candidates at all, or is it more about maintaining the appearance of inclusivity?
So technically, all a candidate requires is 300 of the delegates to sign their petition to submit their names. And thus far, no one has done that, I think, except for Vice President Harris, or is going to do that. So it's not a high bar for entry if another candidate wanted to do it. But I think for lack of a better word, coronation or coordination around Harris has made it virtually impossible at this point for any other Democrat that's high profile to throw their hat in the ring, particularly if the DNC goes ahead with their plans to have this virtual roll call vote. So I think, in effect, she is the Democratic Party nominee for president.
Okay, and just to clarify, West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, formerly a Democrat and now an independent, has proposed that instead of automatically throwing support behind Vice President Harris, Democrats should conduct a mini primary to assess support for other potential candidates. Is that what this mini roll call is going to do? Is it sort of like a mini primary?
Yeah, I'm not sure what Senator Manchin is thinking with that. He was not a Democrat up until yesterday. He had actually gone. He had left the Democratic Party and became an independent. So I think it's interesting that he's trying to come back in and suggest what the Democrats can do. I don't think the Democratic Party has a lot of time or cares what Joe Manchin thinks or is going to make any change to the DNC or what the DNC has planned. Moreover, I don't think those who might support Joe Manchin are likely going to be Harris voters. I mean, perhaps they will be, but I doubt it. So I don't see this seriously changing very much at all.
And is there any historical precedent for this kind of approach, this virtual roll call that's coming up?
No, it was done this year. Well, during COVID, and of course, the entire DNC was virtual in 2020. We all remember watching it kind of on TV and there being different videos, feeds from different parts of the country where delegates were able to meet and cast their votes. So putting that aside, no. And the reason it's happening this year is that the DNC wanted to make sure that their nominee had officially been chosen given some various ballot access laws in states like Ohio. Mm-hmm. I don't think they have that worry now. But that's sort of why the virtual thing was going to come before the actual thing.
And Vice President Harris is currently a front runner, but her nomination is technically not certain. Is that accurate?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And let's take a quick look back at the 2016 election. During that time, there was significant attention on superdelegates. These are the delegates that serve as the party's safeguard for their preferred nominee, and they heavily favored Clinton over competitors like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. With a total of 3,949 delegates at stake and 749 of them being superdelegates, could you explain how someone becomes a superdelegate and how they can influence the candidate selection process?
Sure, and let me start by saying that after 2016, the rule changed. So
Okay.
let me describe what the rule was, and then describe what the changes. So a superdelegate for the DNC are those party luminaries, elected officials in the Democratic Party. So it would be Congress people from state of Washington, senators, the governor, as well as former presidents and former DNC chair people. So these are sort of the leading light, the luminaries of the party, and they are a separate group of people from the actual delegates that are apportioned at the state level due to the party having a primary there. And the rule in 2016 was that the superdelegates could indicate before even the convention how they were likely to vote on the first ballot, such that even though Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders were splitting a lot of the actual delegate votes, the superdelegates were trending towards Hillary Clinton, such that people knew going into the convention, even though Hillary ended up with 54% of the vote in the first round and Sanders ended up with 46%, people knew because the superdelegates were able to vote in that round how it was going to turn out. Now, that, potentially reasonably angered the Bernie Sanders folks. And so what the DNC did after 2016 was then not allow the superdelegates to indicate before the convention how they were going to vote and not be able to vote on the first ballot, that the superdelegates would really come in if there were a second ballot and we were at a situation where there was a brokered convention. And so the superdelegates, I think, are still important, particularly if if nobody does challenge Harris, I mean, in a sense, they're sort of irrelevant because she's won, she's going to win all of the actual delegates. But the super delegates would be really critical post 2016 in a situation where no one candidate was able to win on the first ballot. And again, after that first ballot, then the superdelegates are able to vote on the second ballot. And then you can imagine between the first and second ballot, there being a lot of jockeying, horse trading, negotiations between the superdelegates as to which candidate they want to support.
Got it. And let's keep our view sort of still in history here. Lyndon B. Johnson is the only apparent incumbent president to choose not to run back in 1968. Are there any historical lessons that can sort of shed light on the current situation we're in? And what will you be keeping an eye out for leading up to and during the next month for the DNC?
Sure. Truman also decided not to run in 1952, although he could have. I guess the Democrats lost the White House in 1952, and the Democrats lost the White House again in 1968 when LBJ stepped aside. So perhaps the lesson is that when an incumbent president decides not to run, and they could run, that it might be bad for that party. However, I think both Truman at the time and LBJ at the time understood that they were personally unpopular and not likely to win, and that turns out to be correct.
As we wrap up with you, our last few minutes here, James, is there a world where because of the roundabout way Biden dropped out of the race that he's basically forced to have his name on the ballot even though he isn't running?
I don't know the election law in all 50 states enough to answer that very clearly. I think for the most part, the answer is no. I think the real worry was Ohio, and Ohio has delayed. So I think the biggest ballot access issue, in my understanding, was in Ohio. But I do suspect, although I don't think it will work, I do suspect the RNC is probably trying to plan some lawsuits around ballot access and the names that appear on the ballot in certain states. I mean, the Speaker of the House and other Republicans said that yesterday. And so I take them at their word that they might try to pursue that. I'm not sure it will be successful.
James D. Long is a professor of political science and a co-founder of the Political Economy Forum at the University of Washington. Thanks so much, James. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Diana.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. And hey, this show is only possible because listeners support us. If you are able to give right now, check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.